Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to a friend of mine who's very near to me, only 4 hours away. Well, 5 hours now with our new highway problems, but Dr. Seema Kanwal. She specializes in rare genetic disorders, and she's a naturopathic doctor. So this is actually rare to find a naturopathic doctor who specializes in rare genetic disorders, but she's also a hormone expert. And so we are going to be tying these two worlds together today. So everybody's got to put their thinking caps on because we're going to be diving deep into the science of genes and hormones and how everything breaks down. So Dr. Seema's journey to naturopathic medicine was motivated by her enthusiasm for learning and a keen interest in the human body. As a dedicated physician and continual learner, Dr. Kanwal's expertise covers a broad spectrum of health concerns. She works with women and men for the restoration of hormonal balance, athletes for pain management and performance, children for allergies and overall health, as well as anyone looking to maximize their health and well-being. In the treatment of cancer patients and cancer survivors, Dr. Kanwal will develop a treatment plan that respects the highly unique needs of the individual. Through lifestyle modifications and supportive interventions, Dr. Kanwal inspires patients to learn about and engage in a healthy lifestyle. And I will add, she is voted as one of the top naturopathic doctors in Vancouver, British Columbia. Seema, you are. I saw that.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Karen, for that beautiful introduction. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Yes. And, when we met, I just felt this instant connection with you, Seema. It was just like, oh, I love this woman.
And I felt like we'd already known each other. It was so funny how we were just talking and then wouldn't shut up.
Yeah. Exactly. And I have since now been sending a lot of my clients that I work with in BC to Dr. Seema because her and I see very eye to eye on a lot of different things, especially when it comes to the hormones in women. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Seema. How did you get into really focusing on rare genetic disorders? Because that is rare.
It is very rare. I actually had the opportunity with a friend of mine who said, hey, I have this friend who has this disease. Is there any chance you could help him because he's really struggling? And I had no clue, 12 years ago, no idea what the hell this disease was. Because in medical school, we get one class. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of rare genetic diseases out there. And we literally got one class, which was useless.
Right.
And so I said, sure. And this guy was, brave enough and willing to let me learn on him, literally. And from that point onwards, I knew that this was an avenue that absolutely was needed because in our medical system, diet is something that is not looked at. Yes, they have a genetic disease, but now we're labeling this person and letting them know this is what your life will look like. Well, it doesn't have to, but that's not fair. So just because you have a diagnosis does not now you have to wear this hat that says, this is who I am. Watch out for me, poor me. We don't have to do that. And so through learning about his disease and what have you, we learned a different aspect as well was, what could he eat to make sure when he goes for his enzyme replacement therapies, every 2 weeks, how can we optimize it? How can we make sure his body's going to respond even more effectively? And is there any possibility of, making this disease progression that ultimately, everyone's told there's no chance for you. That's what's happening. How can that be? Is there any way we can slow it down? And so through my own, trial and errors, that's what, we were able to do. He used to, go to the washroom 20 times a day. And we brought that down to a normal 1 to 2 with literally simple dietary changes. Wow. To me, it was simple. To him, it was like life-changing. And then from that moment on, he actually introduced me to other people in that particular community. And from that, I just kept meeting different people and kept then wanting to learn about different diseases. And now I do speak around North America, and I have this opportunity to go to Philadelphia coming up in April. So I think I'm just going to take it.
Good for you.
To go pre-pandemic, but then of course that didn't happen. And so now I'm going to be speaking on an international stage.
Wow.
April. So I'm really excited about that.
That is very exciting. When it comes to the rare genetic disorders, can you change that for somebody, or is it just a matter of optimizing kind of what's going on so that they don't have as many symptoms? Like I have a neighbor, for instance, whose little girl was born with a genetic disorder where she's missing a protein in her body. And so she's nonverbal. And I wonder, like, is there things that can you reverse something like that?
No, when your genes are what they are, just like any child born in North America is all checked for PKU. The treatment for it is diet. So if you make sure that that person's diet is optimal for them, they will never develop the mental retardation, right? Our genes are what they are. Certain ones we can turn off, certain ones we can leave off, certain ones will eventually go on if we allow it to. But if we're actually missing something, and we'll even talk about this when we talk about hormones as well, you can't reverse it. But what we can do is change the environment such that, so that's where epigenetics comes in. Change the environment such that then now we're going to allow this to be maybe less aggressive, or, you know, less to the point where the person's able to handle things a little bit more effectively. Versus just being struggling for too long.
Right. Okay. So I was confused about that because I understand the whole epigenetic thing and how we can turn genes on and off. So then I was like, well, what about people that are born with these genetic disorders? Can we flip them on and off too?
No,
but no, we can't. Okay.
No, we can, but we can definitely support the body better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get into the urine metabolite testing, because that is the one that we see a lot of these little snips written in the Dutch test, for instance, that have to do with our genes. And so I've always wanted to know, how do we combine these two together? Because DNA testing is really big right now. It's becoming more and more affordable. I've done the DNA Power, and I've had the CEO of that company on the show a few times, who you know.
Yeah, I've done that test myself along with so many of my other patients. So absolutely.
Yeah. And so do you oftentimes put those two together, where you do urine metabolite testing and DNA testing and put them together?
Always, especially because, you know, everyone talks about, I'm going to take a vitamin D, I'm going to take a vitamin C, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take that, I'm going to take a statin because my doctor told me to take a statin. How do we actually know how our body's actually going to metabolize it if we don't know what our own body's capabilities are? We might actually have a deficiency in B's, but yet we're taking a zinc. So how does that work? So then, you know, we're going to think that nutrient didn't work for us. So when it comes to this type of combination, I always want to make sure, what is this body's capability? You know, and if there's something that is maybe missing, or let's say there's, you know, a set of two genes and one's poor, one's weak. Well, how do we make that poor part better? So then when I do give a prescription, I know this person's propensity to have a negative reaction is going to be significantly less, if at all.
Right.
That's how the combination will work. So for example, you mentioned DNA Power. In that test, it will tell us the detoxification profile and how does the liver actually break things down. It also gives us our APOE gene. So APOE gene, remember, the 4 is the Alzheimer's gene carrier, but that doesn't mean that you'll get Alzheimer's 100%. That just means you have a really good chance of getting it, unless you make some serious dietary changes and encourage your own body's detoxification. So then that gene doesn't actually physically turn on.
Right.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the combination is actually one of the missing links for a lot of practitioners. And my own, you know, GP included, just wrote me a prescription and didn't even bother checking if my body could handle it or not. It wasn't until after I did my own DNA Power that I realized, well, no wonder I felt like shit. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you can say the S word, not the F word.
Okay, got it. Why I felt so horrible.
Yes. Well, let's back it up for those that are listening that aren't familiar with Dutch tests. So a Dutch test is urine metabolite testing, but can you tell us what that test reveals to your patients?
So a lot of times, you know, depending on what's going on for that person, whether it be, fatigue, depression, or lack of motivation, or, insomnia, like so many things that are just so common, but not normal. That's where I draw that line, right? Just because something in you and 10 other of your friends are going through, that doesn't mean that that's acceptable. So when it comes to hormone testing, what we want to check for is, how is that hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis actually talking to each other? Men and women cannot be more different, right? So for women specifically, this whole fatigue thing is such a popular thing. And I got adrenal fatigue. You tell me what woman doesn't have adrenal fatigue in this world.
I have yet to find one.
That term that drives me nuts, because every single person, I can tell you, my 12-year-old, 13 probably has adrenal fatigue because of this nonsense in the world. But the point is that, when we really want to figure out this person in front of me, where is it that maybe this person needs a bit extra support? Okay. So with the Dutch test, you really get all of your hormones, your estrogens, all 3 estrogens, your progesterones, their metabolites, your DHEA, your testosterone, your cortisol, and all its metabolites. How is the liver actually processing? How is the kidney actually, flushing out what it's flushing out? So when it comes to, checking someone's biochemistry, someone's physiology, this is where I really prefer something like the Dutch test to help guide me better. Because if I do blood test is great, snapshot in time. So if you had a shitty night, then the next day you do your hormone test, might not be so good. But let's say you had a great night, and that was maybe one great night out of the entire month, and you happen to do the blood test the next day for hormones, it might show up falsely normal or falsely good. So it's really, it's different because, depending on who the person is, would determine how much information, what am I looking for? And the reason I'll do the Dutch test, because that will help me actually come up with a proper treatment plan. Mm-hmm. Bother doing a Dutch test if my treatment is not going to shift. So the only time I do a test is if I know that's going to determine how I'm going to treat this patient. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the test is useless.
And the serum doesn't tell us how we break down these hormones.
Correct. It only tells me, because remember, blood is a homeostatic organ. It needs to maintain balance at any given time. So what does that mean? That means you have to know when to even do the blood test at a certain timing in the day. Even timing matters. Typically, people are not told that you have to go at like a menstruating woman has to go at a certain time of her cycle and within 3 hours of waking. You don't do that, the hormone test is going to be invalid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's a bit different. For men, they do still have to go within 3 hours, but obviously any time of the month is fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because testosterone in men doesn't have a rhythm, does it, too much? Like I hear it's more seasonal than it is monthly.
Yeah. It's not as dramatic as estrogen and progesterone for women. It definitely does. It does do its rise in the morning, along with the DHEA, and does its little thing in the afternoon. However, it's not as dramatic as estrogen and progesterone do for women. Mm-hmm. But we still have a circadian clock.
Yeah. Yep. I find my husband, it's so funny because I really feel like he's timed with me, just like how when women are together all the time, they start to their cycles time together.
Yeah.
Because I'll say something like, "Oh, I'm so PMSing right now," or something. And he'll be like, "Is that why I've been so grumpy lately?" He's like, "I'm picking up on that." He won't sleep that great. Like same thing that happened to him. He just doesn't bleed.
That's so awesome.
He even loses his sex drive a little bit, just like I do, which I think is just wild. I'm like, that's crazy.
Wow.
As if that's not fair connection. Yeah. Yes.
Love it. That's awesome, actually.
I know. Yeah. And I'm in the world, Seema, of the bioidentical hormones, and I try and coach women through this process. And the more I do it, the more I'm seeing how important it is to see how women break down hormones, because, with bioidentical hormone therapy, a lot of these clinicians, a lot of these clinics that you'll go to for hormone replacement, they do serum always, almost.
All of them. Yeah.
And then women hop on estrogen and they gain 20 pounds in a month. And this doctor's like, just keep taking it, it's fine. It'll leave. And I'm like, well, it's probably because you are not breaking down your estrogen and you need to do a Dutch test or the genetic testing, right? Like if genes are, so what can the genes tell us about how we process our hormones and just how we anything about hormones? What do the genes tell us? Because I know there's very
So if a
specific ones.
person is having difficulty with, and this goes for men or for women, so if it's someone in the genetic testing, it shows up that their detoxification profile, like estrogen metabolites, tends to build up, then I know that this person, I cannot put on bioidentical hormone replacement right away. I have to ensure that their eating is better, that their liver is processing normal food better before I actually put them on some form of bioidentical hormone therapy. So when it comes to it, let's say, for example, that estrogen issue we're talking about, we have to ensure then they're either minimizing alcohol, or they're not using plastics, they're not using things that are going to be externally an issue for them. Because if they're already having an issue with metabolism, imagine me giving them estrogen, it's going to really get backed up in the liver, and then they're going to start to experience things that they don't want to experience: bloating, weight gain, like you mentioned, acne, like things that are popular when you're a teenager, not when you're 40 or 50. No need for that. And then let's say if this is a person who hasn't bled at all and they've now been in menopause for 1 or 2 years, you give them something that maybe they don't metabolize very well, you can actually put them at risk of something else, even with a lack of family history. So that's the other reason I really like this, the genetic testing, so that'll give me an idea of, is there a risk of, genetic variant? Is there a risk of a heart issue? Because the estrogen in the heart, we have to be mindful of that. As much as it's protective, it can also work against you. It's always that fine balance to try to, balance that with women, especially.
Yeah. And I noticed in my DNA power testing that it was, they only talked about, when it came to the hormone profile, it only talked about estrogen and testosterone, not any of the other, like there wasn't progesterone or pregnenolone so why is that?
I think that it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
All these things, as much as they've been around for a while, and yes, the technology has changed tremendously, it's still new. I think the more that they learn, the more we're going to have that capability of them checking even other hormones and seeing, what else is going on in our body genetically.
Yeah. Is there ones that are for cortisol and how we deal with cortisol?
Not typically, but that's where I like the Dutch, because it gives me the point cortisol. So then I have an idea of metabolization, and have you, do I support, do I not, do I give, glandulars, do I not, that's where I like the Dutch on its own.
Yeah. Okay.
But then the APOE gene test is the other one, right? With the DNA power that will give us. And, usually depending on which APOE gene carrier there are of, will also determine to me how this person is capable of handling stress. So the 4s typically, biochemically, they don't handle stress very well. So they'll need extra support before going on a bioidentical hormone. 3s tend to do okay. 2s tend to do the best with stress.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And then what are people outlet? Like, are they exercising? Are they not? So that's another really important thing. People go on these hormones wanting to lose weight, but they're not going to walk around their block, right? I mean, movement is absolutely critical. This is non-negotiable. So
right.
to put somebody on some form of bioidentical hormone therapy, their movement has to be already in check.
Mm-hmm. Is there ever a genetic profile that you look at and say you shouldn't be taking bioidentical hormones at all?
Yes, absolutely.
And what is that? Like what are they what's showing on there?
Usually it's a 4 carrier. 4s you have to be very, very careful with.
As in the APOE4?
As in the APOE4, especially 4/4s. If you have one allele 4, depending on what the second allele is, would determine my comfort range of how much of the estrogens I do give, and the progesterone. But where other factors are really important, like your outlets, like meditation, like your exercise, how much cardiovascular work are you actually doing? So what is the parameters like?
So what does the APOE4 gene, which is our Alzheimer's gene, have to do with the hormones?
Because the APOE4s tend to build up free radicals in the brain, and their ability to be able to have that cross the blood-brain barrier and allow the body to eliminate it is a bit harder. So for my APOE4s that are on bioidentical hormone therapy, they have to guarantee me that they're going to do some form of like slow, long cardiovascular work, minimum 4 days a week. So meaning you hop on a bike, you don't do just 20-minute hit. You're going to do a good 45 to 50-minute ride, nice and steady, functional threshold power, like FTP training. That's what I often will teach people how to do.
Wow.
Is great, but FTP training is even more important for APOE4s.
Because it's just bringing like you're circulating that estrogen around.
Exactly.
Right.
Remember, the skin is your largest organ of elimination.
Right.
We use our skin to our advantage. People have we have 4 elimination processes, right? Your skin, your liver, your kidney, and then your bowels. So bowels, fine, great. Make sure they're working. Liver, kidney, you got to do labs for that. And then the skin. How do you get the skin? You got to sweat.
You got to sweat it out.
Sweat it out, sister.
Oh, wow. Okay. I did not know any of this. Cause Seema, I take estrogen. I've got the APOE4 gene, I think 2 copies of it. If that's how you explain that.
Got 2 alleles. It'll be 2
yes,
alleles.
I do believe so. It was strong. It was like in the red, 90% on my DNA power. So it's a strong gene. My grandpa died of Alzheimer's. I do believe my mom's got that gene because she feels like she's losing her mind a little bit. And I have it. So last year, there was a study that came out of Arizona. I think it was on 4,000 women. And it showed that women that were on estrogen hormone replacement for bioidentical hormone replacement for 6 years or longer had a 75% decrease in developing Alzheimer's and dementia. So
I saw
we know
that study. It was phenomenal.
Phenomenal. Like that just blew my mind for something that's not curable. I just thought this is like, wow. And I've interviewed Dale Bredesen, Dr. Dale Bredesen.
Oh, you did?
I did. Yes.
Wow.
And he was fascinating. Yes. And he talks a lot about the hormone piece, right? Which is amazing. So what about that, for somebody like myself, who I do really I feel like I do really well on estrogen. I'm a more estrogen-like person.
Yeah.
And so without it, I start to get a lot of symptoms, and it does help for my brain. And I actually put my mom on it at 65. She was 65, hadn't been on estrogen for 40 or 20 years, 25 years, because she had a hysterectomy, and she immediately felt a difference in her brain. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. But we also walk, we get outside, we're doing all these, we've got a good gut system. So is that an okay thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Whew.
Oh, please. You know what you're doing.
I know what I'm doing. Okay, let's go into the estrogen metabolite pathways and how those relate to our genes.
Okay, which metabolites we'll talk about? All of them?
2OH4, 16.
Okay, so when we think about metabolites, you want to look at that, do the 2-hydroxy, 4-hydroxy, 16-hydroxy. Okay, so we know that 2-hydroxy is important because it's an inhibitor of tumors, right? So we always want that to be decent, right? 4-hydroxy tends to get the worst rep because the tumor makers, which we don't necessarily want, right? 16-hydroxy is borderline. It's okay, but at the same time, it's also one that it is responsible for bone health. So we want to make sure we have enough of it, but not too much of it that it works with 4-hydroxy. We would prefer to work with the 2-hydroxy instead. Okay, so when we're looking at this is why another reason I like the Dutch, because it'll give me the actual metabolization and what's actually going on. So if somebody's even at risk of osteoporosis or osteopenia, that's when that stuff is important for me to look at. What is your own hormones actually doing?
Yes.
Make sense? Is that Cole's notes enough?
Yes, we have to assume that the ones that are listening this is probably like we're speaking in a foreign language to them. So
let me back up a little bit. So we're looking at estrogen status, so low, normal, high, whatever the case is. So typically when you're bleeding, we often will have estradiol, which is E2. That's the most predominant one. As we age, and we're now going to go into the second part of our life, which is no longer being able to have babies, estradiol is what will tend to drop, and then we'll convert more into estrone, E1, and then estriol, which is E3. E3 is the one that's more protective for postmenopausal women. Okay. So when we're looking, and E1 is the one that can be the not so great one. It's still important, but it has the potential to be the not so great. So when we're talking about metabolites, we're really looking at the E1 breakdown. The estrogen breaks down into 2-hydroxy-4 and then 16. So when we're looking at the metabolites, that'll determine for me the amount of estrogen that might be safer for this person than not, as well as the length of time. But also at the same time, what other nutrients do we need to make sure that the estrogen is going to be moving correctly through the body? And so the ratio is what's often more important than the physical number itself.
Right. And how do our genes impact these pathways?
So depending on what our genetics are will determine the safety level, as well as, our propensity to be able to, are we quicker metabolizers? Are we slower metabolizers? So then often our genetics will help me figure out which nutrients does this person also have to be on in order to make sure that the wrong estrogen doesn't build up in their body, that their ability to be able to get rid of that, all the estrogens correctly through the feces is going to be there.
Okay. And so if somebody is backed up, let's say with the 4OH, which we see often, right, on the Dutch tests, I often see where somebody's 2 is too low and the 4 is too high. And they're like, what, am I going to get breast cancer?
Yeah.
So what can we do to shift those ratios that you like to use in your own practice?
So I really like to use certain foods. So any of the brassica vegetables tend to be one of the better ones, as they do contain higher amounts of I3C. But it's not just a matter of cooking them and eating them. We have to also make sure that we're cooking them correctly, right? So broccoli, I'm going to use as an example. Broccoli, when you steam it, the second it changes color, you've now activated the I3C. Shut it off. That's how you want to eat it. You don't want to overcook the crap out of it, because then there's the I3C is gone. It's literally done. So other aspects of that one, as well as for some women, iodine is actually very helpful. It will convert that E1 into E3. But again, you have to check your thyroid. You have to check all these other things in order to make sure that you're safe to use iodine, or even iodized sea salt.
Yeah.
Right? The other aspect without physically using just iodine itself.
Do you do the iodine challenge test?
I do not. I usually someone's skin, just get them to do it that way at home. Mm-hmm. Just go get the nascent iodine. I believe it's like True Hope, I believe. That company makes a great iodine, and just get them to use that. Or I get people to wash their veggies with iodine, especially when it's harder to get, organic produce like now.
Yeah. I've also heard that broccoli, it's the stem that has the most concentrated part of the indole-3 carbonyl. Yeah. And people always throw that part out.
Not in my house. It's all part of it. Right. And then for some people who have gut issues or cannot handle the brassica veggies, that's when we'll potentially do a few different nutrients that will help support that estrogen metabolization, like DIM or I3C or, what have you. Sulforaphane.
Yes.
Broccoli.
Do you find that the DIM tends to drain the estrogen though? Like I find some women, if they already have low estradiol, the DIM I won't use because it will tank their estrogen even farther.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you find that the indole-3 carbonyl, even it's a one step behind that, right? One step behind DIM, kind of like it's in the chain. Is that,
herbs though? Like the herbs themselves can also be really helpful.
Like what?
Like shatavari, for instance. Shatavari is an amazing adrenal herb that I find really helps to get women's estrogens a bit better without directly accessing it. It's an indirect access. A lot of people will use ashwagandha. I'm okay with ashwagandha. I mean, it's neutral to me.
Same.
Targets it enough, where shatavari is a great target.
Shatavari. I don't even know if I've heard of that.
Oh my gosh.
Write this down.
Awesome
SH Shatavari?
Shatavari, yeah. SHAT.
And it's a herbal.
Yeah.
Interesting. What else do you use?
Shatavari, I3C, a lot of methylated Bs, depending on the genetic profile. So if it's, if somebody has an issue with B12 absorption or what have you, then I'll use methylated Bs to ensure that the liver is going to be able to, use everything it needs to be able to metabolize phase 1 and phase 2 metabolization. Carnitine, CoQ10, those are also excellent because they support the mitochondria, right? Your CoQ10 is your ignition switch, carnitine is your shuttle, use them together. And then some form of anti-inflammatory. A lot of women I find need that these days, especially with the stress in the world. Either the turmeric or curcumin, depending on the form. I'll gravitate towards liposomal because for women who have an issue with estrogen, they tend to not necessarily absorb fat very well. So if it's something liposomal, they'll be able to utilize that better.
Right. Oh, I like that. Yeah. Curcumin. I love curcumin so much. And I'm a terrible oxidizer. So what does the oxidation side of things? Because that was flagged really, I think I was 100% red on that one. When it comes to, yeah. So when it comes to the hormones, and I want to go back to the methylation part too. Hopefully we're not going over too many people's heads here. You know what, everyone, get your DNA tested and then come back and listen to this. Go get your Dutch tested, go do your DNA, and then come back and listen to this podcast because it'll make way more sense. So oxidation and hormones, how does that go together?
So with oxidation, if somebody has a major oxidation problem, then that's when I tend to use something that's really gentle on the immune system, like mushrooms.
Oh, yeah.
Talking magic. Okay.
Although magic mushrooms have their place now too in our health world.
I'm not going there for this.
But more mental health.
Not going there. That's where your gentle immune system support is actually really, really critical. Things like reishi mushrooms, cordyceps mushrooms really helps that antioxidant, the oxidant profile, helps the body really gain that energy and ensuring that we are, eliminating as we need to. But then there's other really good and, antioxidant supports out there like carnitine and CoQ10, like I mentioned, awesome for the mitochondria. Amazing.
Yeah.
And blood sugar stabilization is another big one that we often forget about. Berberine is an antimicrobial, but it's an amazing antioxidant all at the same time. So berberine, I find for women, if they have like the 100% oxidation profile, that's an issue. Berberine works like a charm.
Wow. And it's going to help correct your blood sugar. So
exactly.
Twofold. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's where then, fasting also comes into play. That's where fasting, I think, is also fairly important. I mean, culturally across the board, there's been so many different cultures across that, use fasting. Right. But here it's like, oh my God, I'm going to starve. Okay, what did starve do? There's a difference. Starve means you don't have access to food. Fasting is you're choosing to not eat something. It's very different. And I always tell women, you feel like crap, go eat something, period. Just because you didn't make it to whatever hour you wanted to doesn't mean you're a failure. You did what you did, be done with it.
Yeah.
We're way too hard on ourselves as women.
We really are. We really are.
Damn estrogen that does that to us.
So let's talk about how the hormones, because our hormones change as a fertile women, our hormones are going up and down all month long. And this ebb and flow, this rhythm is really important because it can turn genes on and off. So can you explain that? What the importance of that is?
When we're in our early 20s, 30s, whatever, those are our years. And that rhythm is very set. Like it's a beautiful rhythm. As we get older now, and let's say our eggs are now getting to a point where, okay, we're not going to have any babies anymore. That doesn't mean we stop cycling. We actually are still cycling. If you look at the actual cycling nature of women, we actually never stop until the day we're dead. We just don't have a period to show for it. Originally, yeah, fine, you have a period to show for it. But after that point, if you don't typically have what you would see as a cycle now. However, internally we are. So if we don't support that internal rhythm for our own selves, what's going to end up happening is that epigenetics, that environment for us, may actually turn against us. We don't want that. So when it comes to really supporting the ebb and flow for us, not to shy away from figuring out what does my body actually need, and what your body needs will not be the same as what my body needs. right? We could be the same age, but it's irrelevant.
Right. There's a type of hormone replacement therapy that's called the Wiley Protocol or the physiologic restoration, which you are trained in. So this is where women's hormones in menopause are replaced to mimic what a woman's cycle would have been in her fertile years in her 20s. So it's very high dose and it's in this rhythm. So because
every day you're taking a different amount of estrogen, progesterone, DHA, testosterone, whatever you actually need based on your hormone profile. And this Wiley protocol really saved a lot of women in the sense of, for some women, the struggle with lower hormones is absolutely astronomical. And the only way that could have been corrected is by giving them enough. Sometimes less is more, but sometimes you actually need more. So Wiley protocol is very specific, and yes, it is you do follow a chart. You follow, the month-long cycle, and determining where you are will determine how much of the estrogen progesterone you take. But it is a significant amount to the point where you will bleed. So I have some women that don't want to bleed, and so their Wiley protocol is very different. Some women do want to bleed even in their 60s. So because of that, their hormones are obviously a lot higher dosages.
Mm-hmm. And they want to because that's where they feel their best.
Exactly.
Right? Like people think that's crazy when they hear it. They're like, what? I don't want to be 70 and still having a period.
Well, that's you then. But that's not somebody else. I have so many women who I like this. I like having a period. So I want to. I don't know what I'll be like when I get there. Who knows? Maybe I will. Maybe I have no idea.
I know I'm kind of starting to like my period's on its way out. And I'm like, ooh, I thought maybe I would try Wiley. And then I was like, this is kind of nice not to have the ups and downs, the light period. It's like, this is joyous. So I'm not sure where I stand with that, but I know that my body loves a lot of hormones. I definitely seem to do better mentally, physically on more optimal dosage.
Yeah.
But that rhythm, speaking of how it turns, if this rhythm can turn the genes on and off, and I know that was kind of Wiley's point, was we need to have this rhythm so that, for instance, day 12, we have our estrogen peak and this builds receptors for progesterone.
Right.
So have you found though that it's still like that it's not necessary? Because people that are in that camp are like, this is the only way to do it, like to get the most out of your HRT.
No, I'm not in any camp. Right now, I'm in the camp that whoever the person is in front of me, what are your goals? That's one, let's do it. So the normal cycle of a rhythm, so the day that you start bleeding, day one, that's when, endometrial lining is now shedding. That's where progesterone has a drop. But at that point is when estrogen starts to build. So estrogen starts to build. And the reason for the day 12 is that's where the peak happens. So estrogen will peak. And then if there is supposed to be a pregnancy, there is now going to be the switchover. So if there's a pregnancy, that's ovulation, progesterone takes over, keeps the pregnancy. So that's why day 12 is so important, because then you get the peak and then you get the gentle decline of estrogen, because now the endometrial lining has been built. You're now able to hold a baby. Progesterone takes over, keeps it. But then there's no baby, then now the progesterone will start to drop off. And that drop in progesterone, what stimulates an actual bleed. Right.
Yeah.
So that day 12 is important. But again, so when it comes to hormone testing, each woman is so different. I have women that have severe PMDD, like major PMS. So for those women, I do day 3 testing and day 21, because those are the two extremes. 3 is why I want to see how much estrogen is there, how much progesterone is there. Day 21, I want to see how much progesterone is there. That progesterone needs to be there, because progesterone, remember, for women is a natural mood stabilizer. It's our antidepressant. It's our anti-anxiety. It's our, so we don't kill anybody. Hormone.
So we can sleep.
Exactly.
We don't want to rip anybody's face off.
Exactly.
Okay. Now we're going to switch over Methylation. I think that that's such a like a buzzword.
It is, and it's been
Methylation.
around forever, and it's been overused now. So
It really has.
it's a little
Gosh.
crazy.
And on the Dutch test, we see, so if for any people that haven't done the Dutch test yet, so you get these 3 pathways that we were talking about, where it's going to show your estrogen breakdown of the estrone. And then from there, it starts to go down into the methylation pathways.
Yeah.
Why is that important for hormone detoxification?
Okay, so why methylation is important is because we have phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification in the liver. If we are taking hormones, we need to make sure that we have to make sure that our body itself will be able to break down estrogen in phase 1 and the rest of it in phase 2. That process requires nutrients. B6, B12, folic acid is one of the biggest ones that's required for phase 1. And then, phase 2 is the rest of the B's, B2 being one of them. So when we have a methylation issue, we might not be able, we actually don't, it's not that we might not, we actually don't have the capability of making enough B6, B12, folic acid that our gut is actually supposed to be able to make on its own from the food that we're eating in order to be able to break down all 3 estrogens as well as progesterone. So in that instance, if our gut, let's say we're prone to constipation or diarrhea, we have gas, we have bloating, we're on antacids, we have, heartburn, all these silly things that are so popular.
Very common, yeah.
Pop Nexium for something, or Tums. We've already damaged our body's ability to absorb B12. There's no way we're going to be able to absorb B12. So over time, if you have a methylation issue, it'll only get worse, not better. Don't have a methylation issue, you clean up your eating, you can absorb your B12, no problem. That's not even an issue. My own genetics are such that my family history is such that we actually are not able to absorb B12. And, everyone in my family is a vegetarian except for me. And I'm not a vegetarian, not because of the B issue. That's just my own personal preference. And the B12 deficiency that's rampant in my own culture is absolutely huge. And what it turns out is, in my own household, when I did the genetic testing, we all have a methylation SNP. And I didn't even know that. So I'm like, perfect. So one of the ways you can tell is, are you prone to depression? Are you prone to anxiety? Because one of the methylation issues is that you'll actually be prone to these things, to mood dysfunction, to mood disorders.
Because you're not getting the B's.
You're not getting the B's. The B's are what cross the blood-brain barrier, especially B12. As an APOE4 person, B12s are absolutely critical for helping the brain, that all the neural pathways there, to actually function correctly.
What about over-methylation?
So if you're an over-methylator, you got to make sure your kidney function is top-notch, because that's where the excess will have to go through. So that's where I check for urine albumin-creatinine ratio, urine ACR. So for women, normal is actually less than 1. The stupid values here say less than 4. That I don't agree with that. So even when it comes to lab values, I'm very picky, because just because the lab values state that it's normal doesn't mean it's normal for you.
Yeah.
So those lab values, you have to ask yourself, how did they come up with this? So who went to the lab, and how have they come up with this is the reference range now, right? It's usually elderly, sick people, typically. So I'll give you a silly example, something like, ferritin, which is iron levels for women. The range is 15 to 200.
Oh, I know.
So because you're within that range, you're all as well. And yet, you deal with hair loss, or I deal with other nonsense. So depending on the person in front of me determines what range I'm looking for. So if you're like, I don't know, let's say in your 20s, normal, healthy, menstruating woman, I want that to be 80 to 100. But if you're who's more menopausal or not menopausal, maybe someone who's not really bleeding so much, I would anticipate that the numbers would be higher, but I never want it past 150. Right. So
I don't know if I've ever seen it. Well, maybe 1 or 2 people that have oddly high iron and ferritin, but I would say majority, it's always under 80.
Yeah. So donating donating your blood is something that I think is really important, especially for
people with high iron.
Postmenopausal women, because then you are not bleeding anymore. Unless you're on Wally, then that's different, right? Otherwise, if you're not bleeding anymore, within about 5 years, to at least donate your blood once. Depending, obviously, get your blood levels checked first. But for men, usually around 40, I always say go donate your blood every couple of years.
Because why?
So you don't ever want the iron to build up in the system.
No, right. Yeah.
Too
I
much
always
iron
tell
is
people
never
that,
a good thing. Too little iron is never a good thing. Iron.
Yes. What do you recommend for women that have low iron? Because that seems to be a real problem for a lot of people.
You have to fix the gut first. You give iron supplements and that person is constipated, that's a big issue, because that means they're not going to be able to absorb the iron, or they're not absorbing iron. And then you give them a hormone. That constipation piece is the worst thing you can do to them. So you have to fix the gut first, like figure out why the iron issue is there. Is it actually bleeding? And then there's so many different types of irons on the market. Depends on what the person in front of me and what their biochemistry is would determine if they're even a candidate for an iron supplement or not.
Right. Okay. Now
we can go into so many different
I know.
directions.
I feel like I've got so many questions for you. Jumping all over the place, but it's good. We're getting these little tidbits, which I really appreciate. Yeah. What about the detoxification genes? When it, not even just with hormones, but I have this theory of, we're in an epidemic of heavy metal toxicity. I really believe that. I think every person that tests for heavy metal seems to have some people a lot. I remember when I had mine done, my naturopath said, I said to her, I thought I was rare because I was like, as high as the lead and mercury could go, mine was. It was blacked out completely on the doctor's data. And I was like, is this like, have you ever seen anything like this before? She's like, oh, all the time. I was like,
it also depends where you grew up.
Right.
I mean, nowadays it's a bit different than when it was 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago when we had lead in the pipes. That was normal. I remember mercury amalgams. That was a standard thing.
Yes, it still is, which is scary.
Yeah, for some doctors. Oh my gosh, I know. It's like, have you not learned anything?
Yeah. And I've had people say to me, oh, I've heard that doesn't, my dentist told me that doesn't matter, that they don't leak my mercury fillings. I'm like, oh, okay. But do you think
education?
It's education. Yes. Do you think, and it's also just turning the blind eye because you don't want to go down that road. That's what I think too. Like my sister, I told my sister, because she's got some, weird stuff happening. I'm like, you should probably check for heavy metals. If I'm loaded with it, likely you are too. And she's like, I can't even, she's like, I can't go down that road.
Okay.
And that's what I said. I'm like, totally understandable. I kind of wish I never did.
Yeah.
Opening up a big can of worms. But do you think it's a lot of why, because we're all exposed, some people are getting super sick from these heavy metals and glyphosates and any sort of environmental toxins? Is a lot of it have to do with our genetic ability to detoxify?
Absolutely. This is, we can go in a whole different level of debate here as well, where how come in one household you'll have, one person with a massive issues, whereas the other ones will not? Like, what's different about that one particular person? Well, it's going to be how their body's capability of detoxification is. Some bodies, due to whatever mechanism, tend to hold on to things stronger than others. And they could live in the same household, in the same toxic environment, it won't even make a difference. So how our ability is going to be. So this is where if we do any type of heavy metal testing, the person has to be ready to hear it.
Yeah.
Right? So when we do heavy metal testing, I also check the nutrient status all at the same time, because then that'll help guide me. Is fish oil actually important for this person? Is fish oil something I have to be very careful of with them? Because even though fish oil can be clean as hell, it's still from the same body of water.
Yeah.
Right. So we have to kind of take it, both ways. And then you look at, our farming practices. Why is our farming practice here so different than Europe? My sister has celiac disease here, not where she lives in Switzerland. How did that happen? So when I went to Switzerland a few years back, this is before pandemic now, I love going to grocery stores. So I think it's the coolest thing to see what's on their shelves. And floored to see Kellogg's cereal have a different label over there than we do over here. Because what we allow here, 10 times worse than what they don't even allow stuff in the country. They're like, no, you have to ensure this is safe in order for you to actually put it in the product. And then so we can sell it to our people. Canada, we can have anything we want. Oh yeah, it's okay. It's a little bit of glyphosate, won't kill you. Really?
Yeah.
That's not true?
Are you sure?
Well,
Have you seen my genetic profile? Because
why are you wearing that full-on gear when you're spraying the strawberries? And I'm supposed to eat this? What?
exactly.
So crazy.
It's so crazy. But, all of what we've talked about here today, the DNA piece is really, really important. And
I find that's one of the missing pieces. And
yes,
helping somebody really get better.
And it's tough though, because you can't take it you can't be like, this is set in stone, which a lot of people I think do think that when they get their DNA report.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, I have the APOE4 gene, or I've got horrible detoxification pathways, or the MTHFR, and everyone freaks out. And it's like, we can use it, and it's so important to see what our DNA tells us. But then in the same breath, you have to also know that this is epigenetics, correct?
110%, which is why I'm always very careful when I do the testing, because I want to make sure the person's ready. And if you're not ready, that's totally okay. Let me know when you are. Because at the end of the day, when I find out something, my job then as a practitioner, it's what I've always done, is I'm going to guide you with tools now that you can use to support your body the best way possible. Simple. It is that simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. We're so good at making things, complicated, which just drives us our own bloody burnout, our own then low mood, our own, sleep issues. We don't have to do that. We don't have to be so hard. Just because I have this genetic issue doesn't mean now it's going to define me. Now that's it. My life is over. Of course not. It's like, okay, I have this. What do I do now? So that's where, you and I come in. We're like, what can we do now? We're going to do A, B, and C, see how you feel. And that happens to me all the time. I have, one particular patient, I'll use an example before we leave. And that is, she was in a horrific accident. I mean, young person, like only in their late 30s. Like I'm talking horrific. Okay. Whole life altering situation, the possibility. Well, shit, right before that stupid accident, she had done her DNA test. Like, talk about timing in this world, okay? Anyhow, I didn't find out about the accident until I think it was like a week later or something, when her husband finally contacted me. I'm like, what? So then I happened to get her genetic results back. So, we have to go through the hospital surgeries, all that stuff. And like, you take care of that, and then I got you. And then as soon as she was capable of actually speaking again, because she broke her neck and everything.
Oh my gosh.
We sat down and we went through her genetic profile. And she was struggling, man, for 6-7 weeks. By the time I talked to her, it had already been like 2 months at this point. And when I got her genetic profile, gave her the supplements based on the DNA power that she needed to actually help her with repair and recovery. Unbelievable. In 72 hours, I got a text saying, I cannot believe I felt like I woke up. And now fast forward, it's been, about another 2 months now. And this woman's healing, the doctors cannot believe. The surgeon is like shocked. Like everybody is shocked at this woman's healing. And
because what did you find and how did you treat it then? Can we know that?
It was based on her genetic testing. Was her ability to recover from a concussion sucked.
Oh, that's what I was wondering. Okay. Yeah. Because that's one of the things that they tell you, which I think is so funny. Like how susceptible are you to concussion?
She had issues with choline, which meant she needed to eat more eggs. And her genetic profile meant she didn't do well with animal protein. I switched her to a bit more plant-based. And I'm still having some animal protein. She had a major issue with B12. She could not do the conversion on the DNA power test. Gave her that as well. Vitamin D was an issue for her, and supported her stress response based on what the DNA power was. Lo and behold, it is like she's actually walking, which the doctor said is going to take you a year. Well, it didn't.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, unbelievable recovery.
Do you find in your practice that often happens where you'll switch somebody's diet based on their DNA results and it's favorable?
Game changer. Yeah, I work with athletes, like professional athletes here, like with, it doesn't matter what teams, but regardless. So we've done this a couple of times, and I mean, just their performance, their recovery, It's been game changer. My own son, actually, I'll use my own son as an example. He's part of the UBC rowing team. So when I did his genetic profile, we changed a few things up, and obviously I'm mom, so it's a little different.
Yes.
So we gave him the actual data, because at least he's like me in that respect. I want to see data. Here's your data. This is what you need to do based on your data. Game changer. He literally shaved, like in the rowing world, a couple of seconds makes a big deal. On his 2K race that he did, shaved off, like, I think it was, he said to me, like 3 seconds, which is absolutely huge. Switched him to first place. Unbelievable.
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
his recovery has been amazing.
Wow, that's so exciting. I can't wait for you I'm going to go see Dr. Seema and have her look at my DNA and my Dutch and put it all together for me. Because we have a worldwide audience, predominantly most of the audience is actually from the United States. So Dr. Seema, are you allowed to see people I know you can't write prescriptions, but do you consult with people around
all
the world?
time? Yeah, I mean, I do international speaking for a rare disease organization, so that's part of what I do regardless. So I usually have a doctor in whatever state that they're in will work usually with us to order labs or whatever. Then I do the interpretation and I help people all the time. This is a standard thing. So
excellent.
Yeah, come meet me in April.
Yeah, there we go. Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I know you got to go. So listeners, if you guys have questions for Dr. Seema, please write them in. I'll put the link to the Q&A for the podcast and if I get enough questions from you guys, because I know that we didn't go very deep into a lot of these things and a lot of surface stuff here and could be confusing. You have your own questions about your own DNA report or your hormone report. And if we get enough questions, I'll have Dr. Seema back on and we can do a Q&A with her. So that would be
fun.
If anything, I'll just write down my own questions.
I love it, Karen.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate your time, and I will be talking to you soon.
Sounds good.